issue. Are there any political ramifications here? Do you think the government should be demanding answers from the AOC as to why they're not going to end up with as many gold as they'd pledged going in?
Well, actually, I think it's sort of indicative of the Prime Minister's luck. She sort of has none. You know, there's no doubt when the country does well at the Olympic Games.
fault.
Well, no, but they'll say it's Tony Abbott's fault. You know, when the country does well, there's a good mood for a little while when we're doing well at the Olympics. But the Prime Minister has sort of missed out on that again. You know, over the weekend, one of the funniest sort of things running around in the blogosphere and in the Twittersphere and all that was since 1982. We've won 8 gold medals, then 10 medals, then 16, then 18, and then 14, and you bring in the carbon tax and we win 1. You know, and it just went all around the world as a funny little graph. But you can just tell. I went to the football in Canberra at the weekend, the rugby league, and they beat Brisbane, and half of Canberra felt really good. In Adelaide this morning, half of the city feels really bad because they had a dreadful football result. The country is not as... You know, this could have been a bit of a confidence boost for the country at a time when everything's flat, but it hasn't happened, and that sort of spin-off you get for everyone feeling good hasn't rubbed off on the government, and she's just out of luck.
Bruce, there you have it, the carbon tax. Julia Gillard to blame for the lack of gold medals coming out of London. What do you make of this? Would Julia Gillard have hoped for a bit of a boost out of this? And does the AOC deserve to be grilled when this is all over as to where our money's going?
Oh, certainly not by government. Interestingly, I think it was in 1976, when we had a very bad performance at the Olympic Games, that after that they had a review and inquiry, and they established the Australian Institute of Sport. So, you know, sometimes some good things can come from reviewing it, but you know, I think everyone's getting a little bit hot under the collar. There was one report in the Fin Review today where they linked the Australia's success at getting medals with the value of the Australian dollar. The higher the dollar was, the worse we went. So look, I think that's all a bit of fun, really. I don't think the electorate is particularly hot under the collar about it. And I think, you know, these things give you a feel-good effect for a little while, but after that, you know, everybody gets back to, you know, looking at what's going to happen to the footy or whatever, and life goes on.
Well, look, the political debate is still continuing, albeit quietly, while the Olympics are on. Today, we heard from Tony Abbott. He delivered a speech to the Institute of Public Affairs, and his topic was really all about the proposals for media laws, freedom of speech. Here's some of what Mr Abbott had to say.
Especially in the hands of the current government, any new watchdog could become a political correctness enforcement agency destined to suppress inconvenient truths and to hound from the media people whose opinions might rattle Philip Adams' listeners.
Graham, is it a bit rich to have Tony Abbott coming out today slamming the government over a proposal? We haven't even heard back from the government yet as to whether it is going to adopt those recommendations for a new media body.
Yeah, but you know, why go down this path? You know, what is broken? What's broken in our media? I reckon we have fantastic media in this country. You know, you have a look at around the world, our print media, our television people. You know, just because the government is a bit upset at the run it gets, it wants to change the rules. Well, it's just pathetic. You know, and when you look at it, you know, the most vicious and smearing and ugly stuff is actually on Twitter and on blogs nowadays, not in the mainstream media. And we already have a press council. And as an ex-journalist, I can tell you, nobody wants to get referred to the press council and to get a very swift rap over the knuckles. You know, they don't have a lot of power, but no journalist likes it. And we have a system in Australia where, you know, providing there's an ounce of truth in something, it's not malicious, it's not defamatory, then you know, people ought to be allowed to say and print what they think. You know, we've got to the stupid stage where we've even got a law which is almost the hurt feelings law, and you can't tell jokes about other countries anymore. You can't tell jokes about our Indigenous brothers and sisters or anyone else, and yet You know, everyone else tells jokes about Australia. You know, Lord Sebastian Coe, who's sort of the POM running the Olympic Games at the moment. He got asked before the Olympics, how come Australia does so well in sport and the POMs don't? And he said Australia doesn't have any cultural distractions. Now that's funny, but in Australia, somebody would have challenged him and it ended up in court. This is political correctness gone mad, and we've got to be very, very careful, and this government's got to be very careful that it doesn't hair off down a path that it can't get off, and this freedom of speech thing becomes a real bugbear for them. I would tell them to put any report in the bin because the system is not broken.
Bruce, where do you think the government is going with this? It seems like we have seen signs from Julia Gillard that she won't go too far. She's asked for feedback from media bosses, which seem like a bit of an olive branch.
Yeah, I think she's asking for input from those media proprietors, and I suspect that that's happening now. And I think we're going to get an outcome where everybody can live with the results. I mean, this, as you said it before, is a report, and the government hasn't expressed an opinion on it yet. So it's a bit rich for Tony Abbott to be getting too hot under the collar about it. As to racial slurs, well, I'd like to think that we live in a country where we do come down pretty hard on people that engage in racial slurs. It's a very divisive, very hurtful thing to do. In fact, you know, we've seen the effects of that in our own history and elsewhere, and I think it's one of the most unsavoury aspects of any political culture that you would allow that to happen. And I'm sorry, that's where I would digress with Grahame quite forcefully. I don't think there is room for in our political discourse for that sort of discussion, that sort of use of terminology. If it is used, then I think people should be brought to account for it, because, you know, for too long those sorts of words were used, that sort of language was used to demean, humiliate and offend people, and I think it's about time that we got past all that. And I think it's very interesting that Tony Abbott would go to that as being an issue that he thinks is such significance in the 21st century. Surely there are much more compelling issues for us to be dealing with than whether someone can go out and make racial slurs against somebody else and not be picked up under Section 18C of the Racial Vilification Act.
Bruce, you're joining us today from Darwin. I understand you're going to be working on the Northern Territory election campaign. It kicked off today with a big launch. We heard from both of the contenders. It seems like law and order is going to be a big issue coming up in the Territory's campaign, which is going to be on the 25th of August. What's your sense of how it's going? Is this another election that's going to go the Libs' way, do you think?
I think it's going to be a very tight election. That's my sense of it, Ashley. Right now it's a hung parliament, but the government's managed to govern with considerable success with the assistance of one independent. There will be some big law and order issues. The government has introduced what they call a banned drinkers register here in the Territory, and they've, I think, got about 2,500 people on that register now. They can't drink in public, they can't go and buy grog, and that's been quite successful as a law and order measure by the government. The opposition will obviously go to other issues to try to beat that issue up. But the economy is going strongly here in the Territory, and so I think, you know, the usual sorts of things that you run against a government that's been in for a while are going to be harder for the opposition to maintain, because the overall state of the economy here is pretty good compared to other parts of the country.
Grahame, it was a pretty tight race last time around in the Territory. Do you think the Country Liberal Party will get over the line this time?
Well, look, I think they're starting with their nose in front. You know, it's only a swing of less than 1%, and in the north, you know, the electorates are only 4,000 people. You could invite all your constituents to a barbecue and have them all around. So the personal vote, the personality vote becomes very important when there's only 4,000 people in an electorate. So all of that sort of stuff is really important as to who the candidates are. But it's one of those sort of things that I think Terry Mills and the Country Liberal Party have a real chance this time, and mainly because 11 years which is what Labor's had. 11 years is long enough for any government. It's probably 4 or 5 years too long in this country nowadays. And it's probably time for a change. And I think the coalition or the CLP has actually got its act together and are ready to govern. And you know, 11 years, look, the It's Time campaign, I suspect, will probably just mean the Henderson government just falls.
Grahame
And so-
Morris
and
and
so
Bruce
it should.
Hawker.
There's a saying here.
We'll wait and see.
So,
What's the saying, Bruce?
I was just going to say that there's a saying up here that if you haven't mowed the lawn of every person in your electorate, you're in real trouble. I mean, they are small electorates, and people expect to get services, and you know, it's very close in every sense of the word. MPs are close to the electorate, and this is going to be a close election as well.
Bruce and Grahame, appreciate that. And of course, we'll have full coverage of the Northern Territory election campaign right here on